Yeah.
Okay. Hello? 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 Testing one. There. I think it works now. It does, ba?
Yes.
Right.
So you probably will have to help us to project one. I hope your button is not.
Are you sure you're not going to give me another one?
I don't have any right side.
Do you have a mic?
I have an other one.
In case it becomes necessary, yeah? I don't mind. Yeah, in case.
So just go on for you can't hear
I'm
me.
special. Okay, this doesn't need to go up at all, right?
Yeah, because I
Let it
don't
stay on.
just leave it on. I leave it.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Ola Busayomi Omofe, and I work with the Electricity Hub. We would like to appreciate you for joining us this evening. And please, I would like to ask that everybody behind should move forward. We don't want people at the back, so please kindly move forward. The topic for today is tackling energy transition vulnerabilities in Nigeria. So, this topic, the actual purpose of this topic, the actual actual purpose of this topic is to analyze issues of energy transition. So basically, we're trying to solve problems and the other problems we might cause while solving this problem. How do we take care of these problems? That's the goal of this dialogue. So if you have any question, please reach out to me or any of the ladies behind. We would help you to do that. Then, if concerning the convenience, if you this you could walk from the aisle and take the set. So the toilet is here. If you want to use the restroom downstairs, so you could also do that. And at this point, I would like to welcome the moderator. So our moderator for today is Dr. Undubisi Nwokolo. Please a round of applause for him. Dr. Undu holds a doctorate in public policy from the University of Birmingham and has hands on experience in security policy, conflict analysis, political risk, peace building, and sustainable development in Africa and other emerging economies. He has a significant understanding of local governance, security sector reform, stabilization, resilience, and natural resources issue. His area of expertise is in solid research skills to support policy analysis and development, analytical and strategic thinking, monitoring and evaluation, communication and negotiation, workshop facilitation, planning, report writing, conducting field research on political economy. Thank you so much, Dr. Undu. And at this point, I would like to hand this dialogue over to you. So I wish everybody a enjoyable session. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. One thing she forgot to say is that I'm part of the Nestia family. So, all right, thank you. And welcome to the 87th Power Dialogue. I'm happy I'm the one moderating this. Why? Because it touches an area I'm so much concerned about. We look at what is happening. The question would be energy transition. Who gains? Who loses? For who? I think these are part of the critical questions the panelists will be answering today. I'm happy I'm not on the hot seat. So they're going to provide those answers for us. So what our team from the Energy Hub have tried to do is to select the best of the best. And I guess they should be able to do justice to this today. So I will start with Andrew Enecho. Andrew is the country director of the United States African Development Foundation. Andrew, maybe you can join while I try to read your CV. I've tried to shorten it. I'm not going to read everything. Thank you. Andrew is Andrew is a finance professional with several years of experience in compliance, taxation, internal control, financial reporting, treasury, and investments. He holds a Bachelor of Science degree in accounting from Ahmadu Bello University Zaria. He's a chartered accountant, which is good, as well as a fellow of Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. His areas of expertise includes financial management, budget monitoring and compliance oversight of U.S. state governments. But you must have some dollars. No. Other donors and private funds award. Andrew, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
Next to Andrew is Roch Sonny. Roch is a program manager of Universal Energy Facility, Sustainable Energy for All. Thanks. So she has over 15 years of experience in the energy sector. Her expertise includes handling electricity issue through operational work and leading research projects on analytical pieces, including project management. She was previously the manager of energy access at the UN Foundation. Her previous experience includes her role as program manager with partnership on women's entrepreneurship in energy renewable, right? Good. First time I'm meeting someone from there. And she has also worked as an independent consultant with the World Bank, USAID, and the US State Department. Please welcome. Last but not the least is Baka Soji. He's the ED of Technical Service Rural Electrification Agency of Nigeria. So if we're talking about energy He has decades of leadership experience in the power sector, especially in electricity planning, power infrastructure finance, project development, power sector reforms and operations. He's an energy man and understands the infrastructure development. This is really good. For the work he has done, he has worked in projects that have changed the life of over 80 million households in Nigeria. I think he should be seeking for a political appointment or running for an election. His interest covers Pan-African learning and other forms of building innovative business models and mobilizing catalyst climate capital to scale up energy access.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
So, like the introduction from Busayo, what we're going to do today is to look at this critical issue, which is tackling Nigeria's energy transition vulnerability. From the objective, which I think a lot of us got, there are 4 critical areas we'll be looking at. And what I will try to do with the panelists is to give them 3 to 5 minutes to do an overview of renewable energy adoption in Nigeria. I think why this is critical is because it's a new area and a lot of us are still fumbling and trying to understand what this is all about. So if I start with you, what's the overview of energy transition? What can you tell the audience sitting here?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Ndubusi, and welcome to my colleagues. I am very honored to be here this evening to talk on this topic. When I saw it, it dawned on me that it was the first time we were really looking to maybe count the cost. You know, most of the conversations have been around the opportunities and all of that, you know, but there's a flip side to it. What happens as a result of the efforts to transition? I think the energy adoption in terms of renewable is on the rise in the country. And this has been, you know, enhanced due to, you know, the increasing energy cost right now. And also the fact that, you know, the fossil fuel that we depend on so much is actually dwindling. Productions, for example, for as it stands now is less than 1.5 million barrels. And we are even very, very limited in terms of our products, our refining capacity. Refining capacity is less than 6,000. So when you paint a picture like that for over 200 million people, you start to see the enormity of the problem. I think we have seen an increase in renewable energy adoption, and this has been highlighted by a lot of case studies. In the REA, for example, the rural electrification where I work, we, in the last decade, have done quite a lot of work. Most of our work is actually deployed using distributed renewables. So this is something we have tested. And in terms of impact, we've been able to touch over 8 million lives in the last decade, developing at least over 2,000 projects across various work streams that we touch on. And what is interesting is that very recently, and I need to correct something you said, moderator, you said my work has touched 80 million people. No, it's targeted to touching 80 million lives that do not have access. So that's the scope of the work that I focus on a day-to-day. And I'm happy to report that at least in the last decade, over 8 million people have been affected positively. Just to wrap up in terms of my own outlook, I think very recently, in the beginning of this year, IRENA, working with the Energy Commission of Nigeria, has really set the scene in terms of the scenarios for energy adoption. Electrification plays a very big role, and we're looking that in 2030, we will have 50% of our energy source coming from renewable, almost 50%, 47 precisely. And in the next 20 years after that, by 2050, it is hoped that we will have another 10% added to that. So that's quite ambitious, but I think we're on the right path. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Rochi, let me come over to you. The same question. Can you give us an overview of
But let me sort of take a step back and say that it often doesn't dawn upon me, and originally, I'll come to that in a bit, that Nigeria has the largest electricity deficit. We're talking about 40% people who cannot sit in a room like this with no electricity, no lights. Internet is a dream. So if you're talking about 85 million people, which is almost the equivalent of a Turkey or a Germany, it sounds wild. It is wild. So I think this conversation is so timely to talk about energy transition and the renewable landscape of the country. So I guess just two aspects, and I started on a bit unfortunate note, but let me give it a positive spin to say that there is a massive opportunity, which is what I think the work that Engineer Barca, REA team has been leading at the front lines for many years now. But to say that there's a huge opportunity to make this the largest off-grid electrification program on the continent, in the world. And I would say it's pretty much coming close to that. So I think that's the silver lining here. I think the second aspect, which I do want to get to when I do talk a little more about, is the energy transition plan. Nigeria is one of those countries that has a homegrown vision for what the trajectory to 2030, 2060 looks like. And that's a hard one to follow. Of course, I'm not taking away the obstacles that lie, whether it's financial, institutional, and on many levels regulatory. But again, there's a vision that can be followed, which is a very big deal. Again, I think just to give you a bit more color on the solar landscape, which I think I would assume the audience is more familiar with, it's one of the countries with the largest solar potential. And that's where much of the work that the government has been pioneering along with certain stakeholders has been at the front lines. So we're talking about programs like Solar Niger, our own work from Sustainable Energy for All on Universal Energy Facility, World Bank and AFDB support, along with the government that's been leading charge on the Nigeria electrification project, and so on and so forth. So again, there's a very vibrant space that we can build on and go further on. Then the second point, and which I think is also perhaps known to everyone, is around hydropower, wind power, biomass. Nigeria is again blessed with some of these resources, maybe not to the extent as solar, but again, this is contrary to solar, not being as explored as we'd wanted to see. So there is that window of opportunity that I see that could also be potentially looked into. My final point, just throwing in a bit of a number here, is 64 million people are expected to be connected by decentralized renewable energy by 2030. With the World Bank and the government of Nigeria, just looking at what is that opportunity in terms of numbers that we're talking about when we talk about decentralized renewable energy. So I'll pause here. Back to you.
Okay, Andrew, just a few minutes. What do you have to add?
Okay, so for me, thanks again for inviting me for this. The last time I was here was August 2017. It's a long time ago. So I'm happy to be here. So for me, there couldn't have been a better time to talk about energy transition than the current period that we find ourselves. At a time where crude oil prices are rising, energy costs going up, coupled with the fact that recently the federal government of Nigeria took precious beloved subsidy away, making petrol prices to rise astronomically. I think it's high time we go back to the table and look at energy transition, how we can transition and diversify our energy mix, our energy portfolio. And the talk has always been about renewable energy, and that is where we should be moving to. We need to scale up our adoption of renewable energy, but of course we know that there are lots of challenges with that, especially the initial investment cost, which has further set us back. There's been a lot of talk about renewable energy in the past few years. The adoption has been impressive, but then it's still very slow. Investment isn't coming through as expected. I read a report recently that for 20 years, from 2020 to 2020, or 2000 to 2020, over 20 years, the total investment in renewable energy went up, but only 1.5% came to Africa. That is the conversation we need to begin to have. Why is funding not coming to Africa, sub-Saharan Africa for that matter? If we don't scale up that funding, then we will be having a lot of problem. And that is where agencies like the USADF comes in to see how we can address the problem we have in that sector, so that investment could be attracted and brought into that sector. Because if we don't have investment coming to that sector, the adoption will still be low, and we won't be able to move forward with the energy transition plan. Without finance, we cannot catalyze that plan. We cannot take the plan anywhere. When I looked at the scale of investment that is required to push this plan, and at the initial the initial investment that is required is about $10 billion for a start, cannot but look to the future with a lot of optimism. In the sense that if they give us $10 billion now in Nigeria, I know we won't put it to energy, we'll put it to other need because we have a huge gap, financial requirement gap. But then that is what we are looking at. That is the scale of the problem we are looking at. A problem that requires $10 billion to start with. We need to begin to see how we can attract investment to that sector. And the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm a prayer warrior. I know the $10 billion will come. So I want to assume that they will have the $10 billion now. But my problem is there are challenges. We've been able to lay out the overview, and I'm sure everybody sitting here understands what we're saying. But the critical issue is on the challenges. So let me come to you. There are a lot of challenges around renewable energy, especially with the issue of displacement, unemployment, because even if we say we have the 10 billion and we need to scale up, there will be losers, there will be gainers. And this is where the vulnerability comes. Some communities will lose their farmland because organizations like us have decided to mount solar panels all over. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, it's interesting, because I think I would rather redefine it. I don't think there would be losers because we're doing the right thing. We're having this kind of conversations, right? But what this kind of program also helps with is to paint a picture that's clearer. I could start, for example, from the economic standpoint, which you highlighted about job loss. I don't think that there will be job losses. I think jobs will be redefined, if you ask me, because if you look at, say, the oil and gas sector, it's just responsible for less than 2% of employment. It's pretty low. So if anything is going to change in that sector, it will be about people bringing on the required skills to actually scale up things. I'm happy where we are. I was at Cape Verde about 2 weeks ago for an ECOWAS program, and it's just interesting to see how far we've come in Nigeria, the work that we've done in the renewable space. But I think the conversation is a little bit more than electrification. So I want to encourage the panel to also expand because there's cooking when it comes to renewables. There's also transport with the conversation around electric mobility. So to bring it back to your question, the global conversation around jobs created by renewable has interestingly increased. In the last years, there has been 5 million jobs created. Question is Nigeria educational system or training system redefining what skill set is required for scale up? And I think, again, this conversation is buttressing the fact that jobs will be repurposed. We need to look at how we can repurpose jobs so that people are not out of job. On the environmental side that you spoke of, there isn't a lot of large hydro projects, which is pretty much one of the significant projects in terms of displacement of people and a lot of environmental hazard. In Nigeria, there's abundance of land. And thankfully, with solar systems these days, you can utilize rooftops and all of that. So again, tweaking the way we about things so that we consider some of the social aspects is also very critical. In terms of financial, I see a lot of disruptions. I see vulnerabilities here because what we have, some of the programs that we run, is some sort of saturation in the financial market. I think there's a lot of exposure, especially from the on-grid side, and it is limiting the ability of the financial system to encourage renewable adoption. So on the flip side, I think there are opportunities to look at non-traditional funding. Ruchi, I'm sure, had been working on voluntary carbon markets and all of that, which I think she'll touch on. But these are some of the things that we look at. Finally, on the technical side of things, I think yes, there are vulnerabilities here. Because if you really want to scale on an industrial level, there's an opportunity for decentralized renewable. However, there is the conversation about grid connected renewable solutions. And sorry, I'm focusing a lot on electrification, but that's my area. But like I said earlier, when we talk about renewables, there's a conversation around industries, transport, cooking, and all of that. So there needs to be a conversation around strengthening the transmission and distribution system to be able to take on more renewables. And finally, again for the second time, finally, what is interesting is the fact that renewables are actually competitive in pricing, right? So I think more than anything, when we have these conversations, we compare them with hard numbers and we see that we are not really in a bad place in terms of the impact. Thank you.
Okay, I would have loved to ask a follow-up question,
Yes.
which is based on the work you're currently doing.
Hmm.
Are you noticing any vulnerabilities and how are you dealing with it?
Yes. So in terms of the technical side, again, I would like to talk around these issues through thematic areas. So technical. Recently, we've worked with the UK government to look at how we can integrate renewables. We've been doing a study on the Mabushi project, the 1 megawatt project developed by EM1 and a distribution company, a utility disco. And the studies have been very promising. So that's something we are doing. As government, our role is to continue to demonstrate what's possible, to de-risk the environment, to encourage very simple policies that would enable this adoption. On the financial side, we have launched a number of projects, including our Nigerian electrification project, which has been largely successful. On the back of that, now, just yesterday or so, the Minister of Finance had announced extra funding for more renewable projects, right? And that's a follow-on project on our distributed access project for $750 million. So in simple English, what we are doing is focused on renewable project program to be able to increase the energy adoption. Some of the things that we're working on.
Thank you. Let me come over to you, Rochi. So that's where you're doing a lot of work. How is this affecting?
Loaded question, but before I get into that, I do want to just build on what Engineer Baka was saying. He was modest to not mention this, but I think Nigeria is a front runner in terms of laying down the foundation, addressing much of the challenges. So I think in terms of the government support, coupled with certain stakeholders who come forward to support electrification, which countries have now started to look at much, much more seriously. So we've seen a couple of Africa-focused efforts, including our own effort, which is the Africa Carbon Markets Initiative, and more recently held ACS, Africa Climate Summit, where we've really seen Africa come to the front foot and say, you know what, enough of this trading between European nations, US taking a lead. It's time for Africa to really shine and build its own markets country by country. So in terms of challenges, that's a big issue, lack of regulatory framework. Nigeria does not have one yet, but I'm happy to say that certain entities are taking this extremely seriously and trying to go ahead and build what that framework for the carbon market infrastructure would look like. The second part is data and monitoring. So again, if you were to quiz me and ask, do we know if a private sector developer in some part of Nigeria, how many emissions are they reducing? I don't have an answer. And I don't have an answer that for some of the projects that I have worked on. So yes, as donors, we obviously want to tap into this information collected, but imagine a much smaller private sector firm which needs a lot of architecture to build. It's usually a 2 to 3 or 5 to 10 member team that we are also asking to now do additional level of calculations, which they have no idea about. So there is that sort of missing foundation in terms of the private sector capacity building, which actually goes to the point that he was making right now, that we don't have that inbuilt curriculum or capacity building in terms of the private sector side of things to say, you know what I've done, this is how much emissions are reduced. So right from a person being able to report this, similar to some of the, let's say I could use the example of airlines that actually require to give this information when you do buy a ticket. They actually say, this is how much you've curbed in terms of the emissions by taking this particular flight. That's the kind of level we want to get to at some point. So data and monitoring, a missing piece for now. I'll give you another example here, which is around diesel displacement. Diesel is no surprise to many of us in the living in the country. But if you were to ask me that question, so how many diesel gensets? Tell me, the last years. Just give me a blueprint of how many diesel gensets. And let's use Lagos because that's. And that money is not getting poured into, at least at the levels we really, really want to see. So again, again, not a surprise, but that's a massive gap that remains. Again, not Nigeria specific, but continent-wide, it's huge. It's a big, big issue. Just to give you a sense, and I wrote this number quickly, is that we're talking about 400 billion US dollars over the next 30 years across different sectors in Nigerian economy. Again, we try to map out where does this money come from, and again, no easy answers here. And what that number really translates into is $5 to $8 billion per year, which again is extremely massive. So again, that's a big question looming on our heads, but again, complicated in the climate finance side of things.
How big is the private sector playing in the carbon market development?
So it's a pretty huge. You'll be surprised that some of the biggest markets lie in the countries of Ethiopia, Uganda. And I'll say it was a big surprise to me when we were doing some research around our work that Nigeria didn't feature in terms of private sector really tapping into the carbon credit side of things. The answers and challenges are obvious. Some of these are laid out. But other additional challenges really included around monitoring. So sometimes for monitoring a baseline, as I was mentioning, you need to fly in auditors from Sweden, India, which is really a result of lack of expertise in the country, which is such a huge cost, just getting in people to do months and months of work in the country, paying for them. So that's another monitoring and verification, which seems like a very minor slice of things, but definitely a bottleneck. So again, there are several pieces where Nigeria does not feature as much as we'd want it to. But pivoting to the positive side, Nigeria has a hugely vibrant private sector. So for me, when I saw that data where Nigeria did not feature in the top 5 countries or where transactions potentially have been happening in the past, that to me tells me something is wrong. And that, again, goes back to the point that there needs to be an overarching framework with the private sector can come in, investors can come in. So there's a supply side, which I still think is doing relatively well in terms of, again, the vibrant sector that we see here. But that investment side has not trickled in just because of the lack of regulatory uncertainty.
I wanted to ask you what should we be doing, but I'll wait until when we get to recommendations. Let me come over to you, Andrew. We're talking about these challenges and renewable energy adaptation or adoption. Especially when it comes to its development, seems to be challenged greatly. As someone who supports people who work in this field, what are these challenges and what do you think we should be doing?
Okay, thank you. So I think the challenges have been plugged by Raj and other panelists today, and I won't want to drag the issues further because the issues are essentially the same. But as a donor or an investor working in this space, we generally face the problem of finding and funding the right enterprises. As an agency, what we do essentially is providing grant funding to small-scale renewable energy companies that can, build a model that can be replicated and brought to scale. And one of the challenges is finding and funding the right enterprises. And I can assure you that it's a thankless exercise for us to go through due diligence process with some of these companies, and you would find a number of companies applying for funding, and then when you go through the due diligence process, almost all of them will fall through the crack. It's a huge challenge, And that is why, as an agency, one of our core mandates is to build capacity of small scale renewable energy company. But before we do that, we need to have some level of capacity, which is extremely difficult to find in this market. Because if we want to make small scale enterprises attractive, to funders in this space, we need to be able to get something very basic, and that very basic thing is really difficult, to find in the market. But thankfully, we were able to find and fund a couple of them. But looking at those that fall through the cracks because they are unable to meet the due diligence process, which is even far less than what other financial institutions would, present, means that there is a lot of challenge in that space that needs to be addressed. And only, continuous deployment of investment into that capacity building space will address this problem. It's a huge problem, I can confirm. And with time, I believe that we will be able to overcome those. But for now, as an agency, we are doing the best that we can to build the capacity of these companies to make them attractive to funders. And over time, we found out that some of the companies that have gone through our process have become big. Some of them are here in the room today. Thank you.
It's huge. Each time people are applying for projects and they say, we're going to use this money to do capacity building. People like you will say, what is it that tell us about the capacity? Can you tell us the type of capacity building you're helping them to do?
Okay, so when we're talking about capacity building, we're not talking about training. Because when you say capacity building, next thing you see people come into a room like this with flip charts and all, and then they are training them, and that is what is called capacity building. Now, when we talk about capacity building, what we are talking about is simple. For an entity to become attractive to funders, they need to have some basic things, whether it be in form of small scale equipment, capacity, in form of working capital, technical capacity, very important. Those are the capacity we are talking about. So when we provide funding to companies, the kind of capacity you see us, giving them is, monies to be able to build infrastructure that they can use as, evidence of follow-on funding. So we won't take them into a room and train them. We will give them money to, to buy equipment, to demonstrate that they can actually carry out this work so that other funders can see them. Now, when a bank, for example, come or any financial institution come to you, they ask you for what you have done in the past to show as evidence of capacity. And if they don't see anything on the ground, they don't finance you. What we do is we are able to risk between $100,000 and $250,000 for early stage enterprises to show that they can actually, carry work. And that way they are able to provide evidence. Nobody will bring $10 million or $5 million to you if you have not been able to show that you have the capacity to spend, report, monitor your project. You have the capacity to plan, operate, build, and also monitor projects. Those are the kind of capacities we're talking about when we talk about capacity building. Of course, there is a bit of training element, but not classroom style training, field training that involve, technical capacity from bigger firms, either locally or internationally. But most of our capacity support comes from local vendors. So as an agency, ADF, which is for Africa and by Africans, we want to ensure that all our technical support comes from within the country.
Thank you so much. So let me come over to you, Baka. I'm going to try to create two scenarios or use two issues. Although different, but there's something I'm trying to establish, and I'm sure you follow me. The United Kingdom, because of its current economic woes, has gone to start franking some places they didn't want to do something. But before they said we're going to do this, they came up with some ways to mitigate whatever thing will be the outcome of that franking they were going to do. Now let's look at Kenya. Kenya has done some pretty good work around, renewable energy, especially you find out places where communities where solar panel, solar farms and windmills and all that. Let's look at the work you do. What are the measures you're taking to mitigate some of this vulnerability, this energy transition is likely to bring to communities and citizens?
Okay, that's a very broad question. So I'll try to narrow it and try to answer. So vulnerabilities, we've talked about them. We've used the last maybe 25 minutes or 30 minutes to highlight them, right? And we've
So now we're looking at mitigation strategies.
yes, we're looking at mitigation strategies. I think the whole conversation starts from planning, for example, just having an integrated resource plan. Because you recall we highlighted that these exposures, negative impact is cutting across electrification and transport and cooking. So Nigeria needs a one-stop planning tool. I think that's being developed currently. Um, this is led by the Ministry of Power in collaboration with other agencies. And so what that plan would do is look at what people are currently or how people are currently served, and in proposing solutions, look at the best way that you can limit, any adverse effect and what is cost effective. So that's number one. Number two is in terms of skill set development. I agree with what the last speaker highlighted. Capacity building shouldn't be about, just some formal gathering like this. And on the government side, what we are doing is that there's a huge chunk of some of the project funding that we have that is tailored for technical assistance. And what is interesting is that we are realizing that even financiers need to be educated on the sector, right? So some sessions are, tailored for banks so that their product offering for renewable adoption is well targeted. So this is where we come in as well. Another area is standardization. I think this is also a huge challenge because some of the, negative view that consumers, and we don't talk a lot about consumers, the final people who actually utilize this product, the impression they have could be as a result of one of their negative exposure with an installer. So how are things supposed to be done? Because when you want to scale, then you now need to start looking at the kind of skill sets that people are acquiring. So this is another area that through various programs we also, and when I say us, I'm referring to beyond area. I'm talking about government really in general, because we work in collaboration with Energy Commission and standard organizations and the likes. The other thing I want to touch is we are currently running programs that encourage local manufacturing, right? We know that there is the conversation about competitiveness, our competitive advantage. So we encourage people to, look at manufacturing for panels, for example, right? For batteries and other aspects of solar projects, especially. So this is one area that we're also looking at. Finally, right now the awareness is high. So even in the budget process of government, there is something called greening the budget, where projects are carefully identified to be able to increase the adoption of renewables. And this type of projects, what is interesting is that in terms of raising the capital, we do not only look at the government subventions. In the past, we have been able to raise green bonds, especially for some of the renewable projects. Under the REA, we built the first set of 7 university projects that are purely renewable projects by raising capital from the capital market through a green bond mechanism. So these are some of the things government is doing. But in the end, to close, the whole idea is to be able to unlock private participation to scale, because everything we do is demonstrating what's possible. So the intention is to be able to get more private sector people to come in so that we can scale. I think Nigeria is in a stage where scale should be the conversation, not really demonstrating. We've demonstrated for 10 years. It's time to scale.
Is there any connection between this sort of training and what the young ones are taught in the university, especially people who are studying stuff that are close to what we're discussing today?
That's a very profound question. I think it's probably the most important question of the evening. And for people who are very serious, like China and the rest, you would find that they quickly change their curriculum to respond to industry need. The short answer is, to be honest, there's a disconnect. Most of the trainings people have, I don't know if there's any degree program on the undergraduate level, at the undergraduate level, that is specifically focused on, renewable, and, most times people study this as add-ons or at MSc level. So we need to change our curriculum, and we need to embrace short courses so that we would give installers certification. Because even when you create jobs, people are earning below a certain level because you've not standardized their skill set or their expertise. So curriculum certification needs to be simpler and needs to be shorter, because the problems cannot wait.
Thank you so much. Richard, let me come over to you. And I want to talk about policy framework, which I think, I don't want to say it's almost like the elephant in the room, but probably allow me to say that. And when you look at that as pertains to, renewable energy in Nigeria, policy framework is energy transition to work. And then secondly, you could answer these two questions together. Secondly, when you look at, carbon market initiative which you're doing, can it be able to address the energy transition issue in the country?
Thank you. Loaded question again. So for me, at least, it's very clear in my head that policy really is at the heart of much of what we're talking about here. And I think Nigeria, to a large extent, has been doing relatively well in terms of supportive policy. So whether we're talking about, as engineer mentioned, around the integrated resource plan, so there is an integrated energy plan that is already in place, something that we worked on collectively with other organizations. There is feed-in tariff, subsidies, tax breaks, portfolio standards, and different elements that exist in the country that really promote investment. I think we've seen subsidy come to decentralized energy space in particular in the country, thanks to some of this policy that's been laid out as this foundation to attract these investments from different donors. The second part, I think I just want to dwell on that, is that regulatory certainty attracts a lot of different donors. So yes, we've been talking about the sort of typical one, but I think definitely to Andrew's point there, to attract the more non-traditional players, to me, again, that policy framework in place is so necessary, which again is, I would say, meaningfully engage and be flexible along the way. So I'll use an example, and that's something that, again, REA has been at the cutting edge for, which is looking at the country's macroeconomic situation, were Naira-based denominated grants or subsidy really working. There's an evolving conversation that happens in the space, but I think it's on to stakeholders like ourselves to make changes, react to what is really happening country to country. Again, I think something that works well to your earlier question around having a vision, which again I think energy transition plan really offers that base. So if we're engaging based on something that's already been done. We have figures and numbers to react to. So it's not that Nigeria is starting from ground zero. My final point, which is more, again, sort of linking with your second question around carbon space, is that lack of a carbon market activation plan, as we call it. So it's loosely calling it CMAP, but really that blueprint for a country. So if you were to ask me tomorrow, what does a market in Nigeria really need to look like? I don't have an answer right now, but hopefully in the next couple of months, I have that answer. I can react to saying that for different sectors, not just energy, but land use, agriculture, sectors that really sort of feature well in the country, what should be the benefit sharing, for instance? Who should be responsible for doing what? we are just one minor player in the scheme of things, but really between different government entities, who's doing what? What happens when a private sector is not able to do a project? Who do they go to? So grievance handling. So just some elements that are obviously missing right now, but something we hope to address in the next couple of months. I think my final point would be just looking at examples, and that's where I was starting off my original point, that looking at examples like Kenya, India, Ethiopia, who've actually done this in a nice way in terms of achieving, well, trying to achieve their targets with a balance of public funding, but then obviously again balanced with this off-grid electrification, which needs to be subsidized. So I think that message needs to be clear throughout, that it's not the money of private sector. They do require support. They do require hand-holding into several forms, which is where programs like the NEP and others really, really help. So,
I have a follow-up question. You know, we're not going to be angry. Just tell us the truth. We know. Probably want someone to confirm it. You understand? So when you're looking at
but I do, again, I'm a glass half full person. I'm very optimistic.
okay, great Kenya.
Yeah, sorry?
Great Kenya.
Again, I think Kenya is a out a couple of years back. Again, thanks to the support of the continent at large. I think where
You know that they always say that funding follows projects, right?
Yeah, sure.
So let's agree that the issue of mitigation is a project and you need to fund it. How will you do that? Where will you be putting the funding?
Well, that sounds like the job that I do every day.
So tell us.
Yeah, so every day I sit in my office trying to, take a decision on where to put the money in a way that it gives us the result that is expected. And what we do in that case, and that solves all our problem, is simple: find the right people to get the job done, give them the money, and they get the job done, and then we go to sleep. Now, that is not as straightforward as it sounds. It involves a very tedious due diligence process that brings about the right person to get that job done. Because if the money doesn't get to the right hand, then the job is not, the job is not done. You don't want to give somebody money today and then they use it to run for election the next day. So the due diligence process will definitely take care of that. And what do we look out for in the due diligence process? First, I want to be sure that an enterprise or an entity exists for a start, and that there are people behind those entities that do not have questionable characters or have any stain to their name and personality. We want to be sure that whatever it is they are proposing, there is some level of financial sustainability, and that is why part of the process is for them to come up with a business model, or what they call a financial model, that will show the potential profitability of that project and whether it is sustainable. So they need to tell us, how that funding will be channeled, utilized to generate income. Because as ADF, we don't fund social project. We fund social projects that have business on that tone. So whatever we put our money to, you have to use it to do a business that will generate return, that would support your business and the people around you. So we want to see a level of financial sustainability. We want to be sure that the model that you are bringing forward is something that is already in existence and not a trial model. It is something that can be further developed and scaled, and then increase the the impact. And like I said at the beginning, the funding that is available in this space is very limited and is even shrinking. And so we need to be sure that the monies that is going out is going to the people that really need it the most. And that is why as ADF we focus mostly on marginalized communities. When we're talking about energy, most of the people that need this energy are in very distant, remote communities. And so you won't see me working in a place like Abuja. Maybe Probably you'll find me in a very distant village in Kebbi State or somewhere, in like Kigbe community in the FCT. A lot of people may not know that a community like that exists here, that is like 3 hours away from where we are sitting. Those are the kind of communities we want to throw the investment, and we are sure that we are going to power up a community in a very short time, or provide the energy that is required. So these are some of the things we look out for. When we want to throw out funding, to be sure that the funds get to the right people. And of course, they must demonstrate a track record of doing something very similar. So if you are unable to show me that you've done something like this in the past, even if it's at a very small scale, then the funding won't get to you. So these are some of the processes we've had in place to ensure that the funding that is going out is appropriately channeled through the right persons to get to the right people, and for us to get the desired results.
Thank you. For our audience who are online, you can send in your questions. We're going to collect them and to answer them. We are nearly there. I have a last question for you, and that's from a stakeholder perspective.
Thank you.
Which is, as someone who works in government, right? I'm looking at the role of government in adapting to and mitigating this vulnerability. So if you are asked to say 1, 2, 3, 4 are the roles of government in this whole thing, is it something you could just highlight for us?
Yeah, certainly. I think the role of government is clear. Government is supposed to provide the vision, right? And then government is supposed to try to stand out of the way of those that are supposed to drive, all of this. I think, again, on the electrification side, we've done a decent job. There's a lot of room for improvement. But I think with programs that have been set in place, it's important to encourage programs that are working. The Nigerian electrification project that is under the purview of the RA has been largely successful. I'm happy that there is an add-on project. I think the other sectors, like electric mobility, needs, more work in terms of standardizing compensation. So I think this is where some work needs to be done, because it accounts for quite a lot of consumption of fossil fuels. In terms of funding, I think what's happening now is government playing a convening role in terms of trying to encourage commercial banks through different programs. Solar Power Nigeria program, where we have tried to ensure that commercial banks get some part of their cash reserves to lend to small, medium enterprises. So for me, I think in a nutshell, government will continue to play a role in policy formulation and trying to ensure that they're not standing in the way in terms of possible.
So much. Roshi, almost the same question. We're looking at stakeholders like you. What are the other things we need to know that you're doing that people may not clearly see them the way you see them, in terms of making sure that we are mitigating this issue of vulnerability in the renewable energy sector?
No, thank you. And I'll actually lay out the spectrum of stakeholders we engage with and who I feel are, absolutely important in all aspects of our project, to be honest. Government is obviously the first one. They lay out the vision. They set out what that trajectory needs to be for the country to grow. And again, I think Engineer Baka was right. I think electric vehicles is one aspect which has not seen that kind of vision, which is changing, thankfully. Same with clean cooking, I would say. We need to see more of that vision from the government that private sector can rally themselves behind. A second one I would say is regulator. Again, another obvious one where we've seen NERC set up quality standards, and that's the kind of cutting edge, sometimes frontline thinking that we need to see more of. And again, another good example that Nigeria has already been doing well of. Third, local communities. In kind of projects we give grants to, we want to make sure that it's not just something that we're sending off money to some developer who may or may not, who's definitely impacting the customers and the last mile people who we're really trying to make a change in their lives into, but also communicate with them. Is it really something that we want in the first place, or are we just driving our agenda? So that's a kind of two-way conversation that we really want to make sure is part of all our projects. A fourth one, which is again very obvious to at least the two of us sitting here, is the financial institutions, investors. So we want to make sure, and I'll actually use the word that engineer scale, looking at building scale, giving more money that we think again to support the growth of the sector. I'm going to add another S and say speed and scale both. Sometimes donors can take a very long time to build projects, disburse money. So there is that element of speed which comes back to us to say if we are supporting the sector, that we need to do our part at not just looking at funding, that's an important slice, but also making sure we're flexible enough and pushing for speed. A fifth one is research and education institutions, and I think we've covered a bit on that already. Again, I can say that I actually studied energy in India, and that was one of the first courses that started many, many years ago. I'm not going to tell you my age, but it's been many, many years of India taking forward this very seriously in terms of building energy-specific or carbon market-specific curriculum in some of the institutions. And that's been a game changer. When I often talk to people, carbon professionals in the market, they say, oh my God, it's flooded with Indians, it's flooded with Swedish. I actually smile because I know why that case is. And we want to see some of these countries, including Nigeria, that is blessed with manpower, to be at the same level. So there is that element that research and education could definitely boost it around. Final point, and definitely not the least, is civil society. So we need someone to keep a check on us as grantors, financial institutions, being that watchdogs of the society, making sure we are doing the right thing, building consensus within these communities who are our primary beneficiaries, and circulate and come back to us with that feedback that we really need to hear. So I would say that's an amalgamation of all the stakeholders we engage with and different pieces I see.
Thank you. There's a question I wanted to ask you, but I learned something yesterday. I was in a panel yesterday, and there was a lady beside me. They didn't ask her the gender question, they asked me. So I'm going to ask you that gender question, Andrew. Is there a gender perspective to energy transition vulnerability? And how can partners like you, development partners like you, regenerate investment to be able to solve most of these issues around energy transition vulnerability?
Interesting. So there's always a gender perspective to it, and that is why, as an agency, if you know about USADF very well, you know that USADF is for women and youth. And that is why in whatever program that we fund, we want to be sure that there is, women participation as much as possible. So there's a balance of gender. And so some of the companies that we funded are strictly owned and managed by women. In fact, there was an RFA stream that we ran that was only for women-led entities. And, even though we saw some men coming under that RFA, we still knew what we were looking out for. So we're focused on women. So we are very, 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 very much in support of women-run businesses, women-owned and run businesses, and so for us, there is that gender lens as well. Now, talking about investment generation, what we do as an agency is simple. We provide seed capital and local technical support to enterprises. And the essence of that money is to de-risk those enterprises. Because we believe that if we are able to de-risk enterprises, that automatically they are able to attract additional investment. Our fund is not expected to take them to scale, but to make them attractive to scale up scalable funds. And so the de-risking in the investment that we do is such that we provide them those capital. That capital helps them to build system that will make them attractive. So they are able to build governance system to show that they have leadership, board structure, committees at a higher level. They're able to demonstrate that they have good financial management capabilities, and that is why we give them the funds directly, so that they are able to manage those funds, and then through the guidance of our local partners. So in USADF has a local partner in Nigeria called Diamond Development Initiative. They provide all the financial management and other capacity building support hands-on to these entities. So they are able to show financial management capacity, because if you go to a bank, they say, give me your bank statement for 6 months that shows cash flow. You are able to prepare financial report. If you don't get those funds, you are unable to demonstrate that capacity. So we give them the funds directly. That is part of the risking. We also provide them, small scale infrastructure and a model for them to run. That way, we are able to de-risk them, make them attractive to follow-on funders, and then from there, they are able to go to scale. That is what we do with the investment that we put in entities, and that is how we are able to regenerate, those investments over time.
So let's move to audience participation, which is, another interesting part of this dialogue. So what we're going to do is that the mic will come here. We expect 3 questions. Direct your question to any of the panelists, not me. They will answer them, and then we'll come back and take 3 again. So, 1, 2, 3. 3 here, and then we'll continue.
Good evening. My name is Mark Ehiga. Short question for, what's his name? The first engineer Barker. Okay, from the government perspective, I'm thinking that since you are looking at standardization, I'm thinking that there should be a deliberate policy to Federal University of Technology to have a department to specifically over the years train these men that will be handling this very technical aspect of the power sector. I know we have engineers, we have all manner of engineers, whether building or whatever, but that specific aspect, so that it will be a smooth ride. I don't know if you get it.
I do.
Thank you. That's just all.
The man on pink, front seat.
Good evening, panelists. I would say an accidental participant in this event. As I'm only, I just accompanied someone to this event, the Commissioner for Energy in Kwara State. He came in town and he wanted to be part of it, so I came along. However, this event has been very interesting for me. I have a background in health. I'm a pharmacist, but recently I went into social safeguard. So you know what it means when projects are being focused on beneficial to the populace. However, they come with some certain untoward effects. So what I do now is to look at how those risks are being mitigated. And I'm happy, Engineer Barker, when he said he was directing his question as Engineer Barker, so I felt like, oh, we probably will bombard you with some questions. So
that's fine.
Yeah. So my question to you is actually around.
I didn't get your name though.
Okay, my name is Kazim Abdugani.
Okay.
Yes. So this conversation has been around the supply end of the power of the transition. So I was trying to ask. I want to know if there are instances where the demand end has been a challenge, or you have envisaged some kind of challenge in the adoption, particularly from the demand end. I want to believe this will be very beneficial for whatever conversation or whatever output from these events. Thank you.
Keep going. We can get more. You have your 2 questions, right?
Okay, good evening. My name is David. My question goes to Mr. Andrew. Yeah, you've talked so much about investing in companies that deals in the renewable energy sector. Now, if you look at the space in terms of the profitability for those in the sector, research has shown that it has not been profitable over the years. And I was in a conference recently where 4 renewable energy companies in Africa, they came to present, and none of them has been profitable yet. So what are the success factors of the companies that you invest in that makes you to keep investing in these companies, even as like the profitability is not there yet?
Okay. We can take two more. Yeah.
Okay, good evening. My name is Rinrat Best. My question is for Richie. So you mentioned we lack data, which I agree with you because I know a lot of times when we're putting together project research, you're trying to create a justification for funding, but you don't have access to data. So I wanted to know, with your experience where you've worked and funded like other countries, what have they done that we can adopt? Maybe set up research institutes, or I don't know, like, is there something that they're doing that we're not getting? Because we have a lot of people who are unemployed. I mean, this is an opportunity where young people can tap into and create something for themselves. Because again, it's not even easy, because most of the data, most people who do research, the data they collect is mostly like in urban areas. But when you go to rural areas, it's very difficult to go into those communities due to insecurity, the peculiarities of Nigeria and how each geopolitical zones can be. So what can you say? How can we overcome this challenge and then have data and access to this data when we're doing research? Thank you.
Okay, I think we can take these 4 questions and then we'll come back. So you're the man with the biggest question.
Yes, thank you very much. Mr. Mark asked a question around, technical standards, right? And trying to harmonize these standards through some sort of platform. I think there are different government entities that provide different types of mini-grid. Very typically, you would engage with NEMSA, right, which is the Electricity Management Services Agency that kind of standardizes what you do. But right from the point when you're getting materials, you are engaging with SON, right, the Standard Organization of Nigeria. So probably the challenge is harmonizing this and trying to see how you can have linkages with the institutions, educational institutions, which you highlighted. In our part in the REA, we have a very strong component for learning. For example, under our Energizing Education program, we have a workshop component in terms of the infrastructure that we deploy. So beyond the asset that provides power to the university, there is an entire workshop for training for students. Initially, the focus was for women, alone, but we've tried to expand that to include boys as well in this university. So the hope is that, at least from this effort, educational institutions will also play a role in terms of the research and development to improve in terms of our standards. The second question from Mr. Kazim is that, are there instances where demand is a challenge? The answer is yes. And I think that's a very interesting question, because what you find is when you go out to do an energy audit, even in homes, it's usually overstated. And that's coming from the false pricing point for electricity. For a very long time in this country, we've viewed electricity as a social service. So when you go to communities, they say they need 100 kilowatts. Once you deploy it, you would see that utilization is probably at 20%. But the learning and doing problems are problems that we, encountered. But now we're focusing on the business that drives these homes or communities. So there's something called productive use of energy that we are trying to encourage, where rural communities that engage in things that bring about their livelihood, like farming, for example, or processing, are prioritized in terms of what you are powering in communities. So there's a lot of grant available to encourage productive use of energy so that it can address some of these demand challenges. But you are very correct, and thankfully there are programs that try to address this. Thank you.
Andrew.
Okay, so Engineer Abak, help me answer my question. about investing in non-profitable ventures. Sorry, I didn't get your name. David asked a question. He said, "Why are we investing in entities that are not profitable?" Right? Like he went for a conference and discovered that 4 companies that came there were not profitable. And part of the reason is this. Now, when you look at the capex requirement, that is the capital expenditure required to run the say for example a mini grid, and you look at the payback period, it takes a pretty long time to recover your investment. So I do not know how many years those companies have been operating for that they want profitability, but I do know from experience that it takes a pretty long time for you to break even and then go into profitability. So if you are a company that is looking for quick profit, then the renewable energy space is not the one for you, because it takes a pretty long time to recover your capex. And when you look at the locations where most of these facilities are installed, they are mostly in low-income communities where the the adoption is still very low. As an engineer, I said 20% in some cases. So you say you will have to struggle for some time, except you are able to get people to adopt that power for productive use, and that is why most donors are now channeling their funding from just providing mini grids to power rural communities to providing energy for productive use, because that way the power will be utilized and then used to generate income. But beyond the numbers for the company, as a donor, we look beyond your profitability. We look at the impact that facility brought to a particular community. And that is why when you look at our scorecard, you hardly see us saying how much profit a company makes. We are asking how many lives did that project touch? How many households have been powered? How many jobs have been created in the community? We've seen cases where we've had power over the rooftop of a hospital, and then it has saved many lives. People that were formerly operated in the dark, now there's light for them to operate. I didn't fully appreciate what health electrification meant until recently, when my dad was sick and was in one of the government facilities, and then at night there was no light. I mean, we were literally using our torch. The nurses were using their torch to look for veins, and you can I for once I realized that electrification of rural health facilities is very, very important. So beyond the business side, we also look at the social impact those projects bring to the community. And when we put all of those together, for the donor, it looks like a win all the time. They probably are not aware.
I mean, just not that question was not posed to me, but just to spin it in a different way, that we're here to help those companies become profitable ultimately. We want to support these companies really grow, that speed and scale that we were talking about. The third part of the third S here, subsidy. We'll not shy away from that word to just give them that kind of support that they really need to, again, help them reach profitability. I guess pivoting to my question, thank you for that. It's a topic very close to my heart, so I'll respond to it in 4 ways. One, on the data side, I would say hold data custodians, data holders accountable. So whether it's the government or entities like ourselves or the likes of the World Bank, who do a lot of research and put money around these efforts, ask them to make this all transparent. I think the government to a large extent does this in some countries. I could use India as an example that has, I would say, more recently in the last couple of years really changed its approach to say, if you want to check what kind of electricity or what powers, what percentage of electricity in a particular state, you click. It's a horrible website, but it's publicly available at the click of a button. And that's the kind of transparency we want to see throughout. Using our own example in Nigeria, for the integrated energy plan that we've supported, ask us questions. We'll be more than happy to share our assumptions, what we've used, what data sources we've used, provide you with what we have. Yes, it may not be for every county, but to the extent that's possible, hold us responsible. The 3 other parts are more linked to training and curriculum. So again, as I mentioned, in some countries, there is this dedicated stream of support that's offered to students or interested professionals to move into this field. I'll use US and India as an example because that's where I've lived in the past. But both these countries have certification courses, something that was raised earlier. Sometimes 6 weeks, sometimes 4 months, sometimes 5 months. So quick enough for professionals who want to pivot to, let's say, learning more about solar PV. You get a certificate at the end, so it's not some random Ruchi Soni, talking about solar PV, but there is a certification to back that she's invested the time, put in the effort, and to learn about a particular issue. Sometimes it's far more practical, which I think at least has been a game changer in certain countries, including Bangladesh, Sri Lanka to some extent, India as well, where sometimes it's as much as learning what if a solar panel lands in my house, what is it really needed? Can I do it myself? Likely not, but I need a technician who can do it. And there are now these breed of technicians who actually do this at a cost. So that's empowered regular people like myself who, if you want to pivot into that space, it's possible. I think that in a sense covers it, but yeah, just sort of double clicking on the point of platforms. There are these many data platforms that are supported by different donors, different funders. And very often it's just about that ask that can you make your data available? It may be sitting in some dungeon, some system somewhere, but very often that's possible. And sometimes an easy ask is just to see how often is this updated. Sometimes it's not, which is unfortunate, but in some cases it is. So thank you.
Thank you. I think let's take some new set of questions. The lady here. Besides, there's a lady here.
Good evening. My name is Christine Ibrahim Puri. Thank you all for being here. So my first question is to Engineer Barker. I'm curious about who is in charge of monitoring and evaluation of these types of projects, specifically in projects like Solar Power Niger that is very private sector driven, right? So who is there to let us know what happened to those mini grids after they were installed? My second question is for all of you. What initiatives or what measures are taken to harmonizing similar projects? Like how these electrification projects how do they not become redundant, or how is there room to ensure that international development institutions or all of these financiers are making sure that there isn't like duplication, or that resources are actually being best optimized? And then my last question is for Ruchi. This is a very innocent question because I'm not sure how the market works, but I wonder if you've experienced or if you foresee pushback from oil producing companies, especially ones that have like national oil companies, because there is issues of sanctioning, right? If we're talking about carbon markets. So if national companies or if national governments are part of oil production, what is the level there that you can use to ensure the sanctioning and like the accountability of emissions?
So let me help her. She wants to find out who's in charge of measuring these variabilities. So add it to the question.
Is it time to answer the question?
Yes, you can start now. Okay, so let's take some more questions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you to the panelists. My name is Lucky Aben. My interest is on climate justice. This is a very timely conversation, and let me first of all thank Ruchi for also identifying an important constituency that I'm from, that's the civil society organizations as watchdogs. If you look at the Nairobi Declaration as led by the Kenyan president, he stated that 600 million people on this continent still lack access to clean energy. And looking at the SDGs as well, this conversation, my first question, I think we have focused this conversation on renewable energy just on solar. And I think we have what's called the energy mix. This is to Barker, Engineer Barker.
Yes, please.
So how is your agency also looking at exploring other options of renewable energy so that we can easily achieve energy access? energy access because I have an aunt who is somewhere in Cross River, and I like how Andrew had put it as well. The subsidy removal, the implication on fuel, the prices and all. So this auntie of mine do not have access to the electricity supply from the national grid. So they would depend on powering their phones through generator. And the implication of the subsidy removal now, even though we are buying fuel at 630 here, somewhere in my state it could go as high as 800. So there's an implication on those who charge their phones using generator. So how are we powering the energy mix to ensure that we can achieve SDGs before 2030? And secondly, I think there is a disconnect between the effort of government and also that of civil society. And this leads us to MRV. How are you also reporting the efforts from civil society, their own contributions, because you have civil society who have access to funding on the renewable energy project. When they are done with their intervention, how is it reported? What have they contributed to the energy transition plan objective of the federal government? Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Ibrahim. Mine is not much of a question, just much of a, I want to try and understand something. Three key things by this evening: carbon trading, financing, project financing in the power energy sector. And at the core of this, we keep talking about private sector involvement in these three key areas. And if you look at energy transition, it's not only about electrifying on some people alone. It's also about reducing your carbon footprint in general. So you know that these private investors, private sector, they've made large investment in fossil fuel-driven generation, active generation, over the years due to the state of electricity in the country. So when you look at it now, you are telling them that we want an initiative where you are going to disconnect your investment and make a new investment in clean energy. Is a lot of responsibility to ask of them. And then we also talk about providing access to renewable energy too. So you want them to adopt renewable energy, which is good, which what all of us want. But the challenge is, how do you plan to finance their transition into renewable energy? Because financial has to be made available to them too, towards decommissioning their existing fossil fuel infrastructure and moving towards more renewable energy. It's not a jump, it's a spectrum. It's something that will happen gradually, but there has to be kind of rebate given to them to do this. So I've not been hearing about financing in that area. And it is when they are ready to do that we can talk about a carbon market. So for them to do that, we need to look at how do you intend to. I know that it might not be the responsibility of your agency, but it is something that we also need to talk about. Thank you.
Thank you. At least I'm the moderator. I'm not going to answer this. So you answer this one. So probably we can answer all the questions and then I can take the online questions. So let's start with you, Rich, this time around.
So let's start with the difficult question that Christine posed around different measures we're all taking, which was an open question for all of us. I'll zoom into an example of the work that Sustainable Energy for All is doing, which is trying to sort of take forward the work, the great work that's been done by the REA, so Engineer Barka and his teams, supporting the private sector for electrification. So what we've decided to do is complement the work that's being done by the government of Nigeria with support from the World Bank and AFDB, and look at a missing slice in that picture, which to our mind was displacement of diesel. So we said we have a facility that can provide grant to private sector organizations who are working dedicatedly on that issue, but looking at displacing diesel. So that was our entire focus. What we did, and to your point around complementing each other's measures, was we don't want to do mini grids, we don't want to do solar home systems, because that's being largely the focus of what's already being done by other players. So we focused on that. What we did was to make the sort of the requirements for the private sector to qualify absolutely similar to the Nigeria electrification project. So we don't want to complicate the lives of these developers who are applying for 3 different grants, 3 different donors with 3 different set of qualifications. Poor us, poor them. we don't want this at all. So this was for us in our minds very clear in terms of the technical financial due diligence that we do, that it's completely the same. Yes, there were certain, I would say, parameters where we felt we could push the envelope a little, which was around gender. So we said we will promote women-led businesses to come in. Ideally, sort of look at, at some point in a dream world, 60% businesses that are supported by a facility to be women-led. We're not there yet, but we'll get there. But that's the kind of changes that we made, which did, again, largely the process was the same. To your second question around oil companies, I'll respond that in a different way. And I think that goes to the point that the last gentleman was also making. It's our responsibility to make that change. So it's the responsibility of oil companies to make that change. But it's a responsibility of the future generation, right? So the youth of the world, really the children that we want to bring into this world around, what that climate justice world really, really looks like. But in terms of that particular, so words are great, but that action from the oil companies is done in two ways. They do have I would say most companies do have their report. This information is largely available in terms of the emissions they've reduced, they've abated. But do they go as far as doing enough about it? That is obviously a big question mark there. So yes, a lot can be done in that space, which is where we want to bring in companies, and I'm sure you know a few, who now have actually, thanks to their business sense and acumen, have tried to invest into the renewable energy side. It's not grantors like ourselves pushing for that. It's really their own business sense that they know the falling costs of solar and other renewable energy costs. It makes a lot more sense for them to diversify. And the last point I would just say is around corporate social responsibility. CSR remains an issue which many of these companies abide by. So that remains a target in their heads to at least subscribe to. I think that covers it.
Okay, there's some questions online. One of the participants online. Question to you. It's not coming from me. I'm not that mean. So he wants to know how actions that have been taken on gathering data on reduction in GHG emission. I don't know what that is, but he knows that you know.
Good question, and I trust you that you didn't ask that question. But on greenhouse gas emission numbers, and that's the missing gap that I was referring to. So if you were to ask those numbers, yes, on a high level, I can throw some numbers around. But if you were asked me to just sort of dissect Nigeria and give you those numbers, I don't have an answer, and I'm not sure everyone has an answer around that. So that's the kind of data inventory that we do want every country, and definitely Nigeria, to build. And that's where our work on the carbon market activation plans really comes in. So that's that blueprint where you have these numbers at your back of your hand and can say, this is what is happening right now. And this is a really goal at achieving what we want this market to look like. And that includes these targets. So it will require a lot of modeling. But again, once we have committed ourselves to that kind of work, this would well be possible.
Okay, Andrew, the first question that was directed to you, if you can remember. Okay. It was the general question and the question from him.
Okay, talking about, I thought he said was it the question?
So I think he said it was the question. How you can fund the energy transition.
How we can what?
Fund it.
Fund.
Yes.
Okay, so I think if I get what he was saying, he was talking about the shift that the transition to renewable cost to some of the major oil companies, right? And that, to private sector generally, and talking about decommissioning some of their assets, and that there was a need for somebody to also support that. For us, we are an agency that that is strictly focused on supporting the transition to renewable energy, and what we are doing is to provide capital to show renewable energy can work, because at the inception stages, when the program started around 2013, there was a lot of reluctance from private investors to be invested in that space, and that is because they do not know how that would work, how the whole renewable energy thing, especially with solar, would work. And so ADF and other agencies of the US government and other donors came into the space to throw in capital to show that that model can work and replicated. So the essence of coming on board is not to displace anybody, but to show that there can be an alternative an alternative source of power in the mix. Remember that when we're talking about the energy mix, it is not just solar. There is also wind. There is even gas is even part of the mix. So some of those big oil companies now, they are even transitioning on their own. You see all the major oil companies becoming energies, Total becoming Total Energies, Oando Energies. They are transitioning on their own because they have the capital, they have the investment. I do not see any donor in the world that can fund the Totals of this world and the Chevron and the Shell. They will do it on their own. And I can assure you that they will transition on their own to renewable energy, and they are already doing it now because I do know that most of them have also created the renewable energy space in their company. They are transitioning on their own. What we are focusing on is the small players that also would want to contribute to that space. The big players cannot cover everywhere. Just like we're talking about refineries in Nigeria, where the major refineries can't serve the entire market. We need smaller refineries, if possible, to augment the production from the major ones. So also in the solar space, you cannot have one big company that will cover the entire market. We need small scale companies that will go into the hinterland to go create this mini grid and other solar solution or renewable energy solution in rural communities. And that is where we as an agency come in to fund those companies that will go into the thick rural area to go and create a business that will run and provide livelihoods to people around those communities. So that is where we come in.
So because you fund programs like this, you just had some good friends who wants to know whether you fund institutions that seek to build community resilience and stability in crisis impacted communities, around the energy transition. Is it part of what you fund?
Yeah, so talking about resilience crisis, we fund programs. As an agency, we have three key areas that we provide funding. Agriculture is our main area of focus, where almost 80% of our funding go. And we do know that in crisis-ridden communities, one of the easiest way for them to bounce back and become resilient is for them to go back to land. Now, if you provide power in a community where there's no agricultural activity, what would they be doing with the power? So what we do is, in a community that we do know that they have good agricultural production, we can provide them energy for productive use, where they can convert their agricultural produce, process it, and earn more from those commodities. If we provide renewable energy or solar mini grid in a community where they are fishing, they can preserve their fishes for longer time, or their aquatic harvest. But in a community where there's nothing, if there's just let's say a crisis-ridden community where you just have to go install a mini grid there, what would they be doing with the power? So for us, we believe that agriculture is the easiest way for communities to become resilient. And so for those kinds of community, we have our agricultural programs that we deploy to those communities that can help them rebound. And then with our power nexus, where we provide renewable energy support for agricultural ventures to reduce their energy costs, that is also a possibility. And so we work in crisis-ridden communities for sure, providing support to the members of the community.
Thank you. Over to you.
Yes, I recognize that our time is fast spent, so I would be very succinct with my responses.
I'll try to attempt the questions, in a reverse manner, because you're addressing the private sector conversation about accessing finance. I think it's a blend of a number of things. There's the regulatory angle that will mandate private firms who are very much heavily invested in fossil fuels to cut down on emissions. So this is something I think government will be looking at with time. But of course, there's the incentive as well. So what is interesting is for many of these multinationals, there are global funds that they want to access that mandates them to operate in a certain type of way that is sustainable. So with private funding, I think is things. For the smaller companies, there are opportunities that exist in form of grant, like what we do in the REA. The whole idea is to encourage them to play in this space. I think what private sector small players need to realize is there's no one-stop shop for all the funding you need, because your projects actually happen at different stages. at some point, philanthropic capital is what you require to get it off the ground, maybe through a venture capitalist or what have you. And then at some point, you'll be looking at commercial funds. So, team, I think you had alluded to the African Climate Summit and the need for energy mix. I think it's an economic conversation. In this country, what we have seen is there was a feed-in tariff that tried to force renewables to come on board through various sources like biomass and the rest. But solar has taken off without focus to any feed-in tariff because the economics make sense. So I am not, this is personal now, this is not as ED from REA. I think economics would settle that discussion as to whether you should look at biomass. A typical example is we deployed a project in Obudu and sunlight levels are very low. So you've got to think of alternatives. I think it's just a natural solution. On Christine's question on M&E, I think it's a national thing when it comes to data. It's not just about energy transition. We struggle sometimes with data, and I think it's because the incentives are not, right. Who is measuring and why are they measuring? If you're measuring, there are certain parameters you'll be interested in, but government has a role to coordinate. Right. So I think, thankfully, we have a climate act in place. In the past, what you have is power will do their measurements, clean cooking will do their measurements. I hope that the climate act has empowered the council to take a more central role to actually coordinate so that with impact numbers, we are tracking, with investments, we are tracking, and we are even able to measure our progress. Finally, is on the issue of coordination, which you spoke about, and how are people able to come to one platform. And there's the Power Africa Roundtable Dialogue, which is doing a good job. We need more of that, and I agree with you. Sometimes the answer someone needs is by coordinating more and working together. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we have less than 6 or 7 minutes, so we may not actually take more questions. So I'm going to now come back to the panelists to give their closing remarks, if possible, your recommendations all together. So each person will have 3 minutes to do that. There's a question here. I know I can take it, but I'm not going to take it. Someone wants to know how the security and socioeconomic climate in the country will affect energy transition and the vulnerability around it. I know I can take this comfortably, but I'm not going to do that. So I will start with her and end with you.
So in terms of, I guess, just rounding off everything I've said, to again double stress the fact that there is no better time to have this conversation around energy transition, climate justice, looking at a just and equitable transition for Nigeria. I think the time is also ripe, and the conditions to a large extent are also ripe, whether we're looking at a thriving private sector, definitely in the renewable energy space, to a large extent having a conducive policy landscape also in place, and obviously the missing gap of financing that plays into this. That there's no other country that can do it, barring Nigeria, to be honest. I would place my bets, to go back to your ranking question, on Nigeria any day. I'm biased, obviously, this is home, but if a country could do it, it is Nigeria. I think in terms of the wider questions that you asked, it's $1 million question in terms of the macroeconomic situation, the political scenario. So I'm pretty sure we could take hours and hours to discuss that at length. But yes, that is one of the pieces that could obviously use a much more sensible perspective in some senses, attack it from different perspectives on how we could again support, whether it's a policy framework that could support part of the challenges the private sector is facing on that front, or other macroeconomic factors, which I won't get into my 3 minutes, that definitely need to be double looked at to basically ensure that this transition happens at the pace that we all want. Thank you.
Andrew?
Okay. So I'm really happy we are having this conversation now, and I know that this conversation will spur many more conversations around energy transition, because I do know that for a bit now, we have turned our attention away and focused on so many other things around the country. I think that things are settling down now for us to go back to the plan, the energy transition plan for Nigeria. It's a long-term plan, but requires steady progress towards attainment of that plan. Like we said, today has been largely focused on electricity, but then there are other components. There's the transportation side. There's also the oil and gas side. Power is there. So, and with the Electricity Act that was signed early this year, it's also a boost to the plan. Ensuring that we have a proper mix. And like I said, the conversation will keep going, and all stakeholders role, and we as an agency will continue to play our role to encouraging renewable energy adoption in Nigeria and across Africa. So it's a good time to have this conversation, and I hope and pray that we don't kill the conversation here in the room, and that this conversation will continue. On the security situation, facets of our lives, agriculture has gone mostly. But I do know that the government is having a plan on the ground that would address the security situation in the land. Things have improved slightly, and we do believe that with time, when things stabilize, everybody will go back to their farms. The plan will to adopt solar and other renewable sources in distant communities will resume, and then before long we'll be back on track.
Just touch briefly on the security and give my final comments. I'm from an environment that has been faced with.
Okay.
Yes, and I have seen a direct correlation between, the lack of electricity, for example, and security challenges. In fact, the lack of electricity or the security challenge exacerbates, the energy problems. But very, very quickly, you would see that addressing, the energy crisis also improves the security outlook. So very happy to report that in REA, for example, we have a very big program this year that is focused on energizing security. Most of our programs are energizing agriculture, energizing healthcare. So this year we have something that is focused on security. And my final comments is I was very pleased with the choice of the topic, because I think this is the first time I'm hearing that we are considering what the challenges are that are, aligned to transition. But what we've been able to talk about and what is obvious tonight is that these challenges are actually opportunities. So for me, I am looking to see how even in the energy transition plan, there could be more alignment between electrification, transport, industry, and what have you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Ruchi, to Andrew, and to Becca for coming. I think they've done justice to this. Can we just clap for them? I came prepared, but these guys couldn't allow me to, shoot my bullets. I'll go back with it. I'll come back next time. And for the audience, you've been wonderful. And let's do it again. 88th Power Dialogue. That should be next month. I'll see you here. Thank you.
Please, another round of applause for our wonderful panelists. They really did justice to the topic. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Out of your busy schedules, you found time to come here. Thank you very much. And please do well to network and pick your refreshment before you leave the room. And we'll see you next month at the 88th Dialogue. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.